This is the first of this quarter's Sage seminars, and our speaker is Kari, who's going to talk about SQL Alchemy.
Have all of you guys actually heard of SQL Alchemy before? Have any of you?
I think we all heard of it because we all had to vote on whether to put it into Sage recently. And
What was the vote?
yes, it's in Sage.
Okay. Well, then I'm not sure what all I'm going to have new to
But
tell you.
we don't know anything about it.
Oh,
We just
okay.
have heard of it, that's the problem.
Yeah, I've used other SQL stuff and been
Mhm.
disappointed with it, and I've heard that SQL Alchemy is nice. And I attempted to write something that was in the same spirit as SQL Alchemy, so when I first went, oh, whoa, it's what we wanted, but well thought out.
Okay.
A lot of work.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've never seen a line of it. They have a really nice webpage, and E said he needs it.
Yeah.
So,
For this, a lot of it, like, I've been going through and working with a lot of stuff, and the thing that's really nice about it is it's all, for the most part, very intuitive. And it's also set up so that it's relatively, like you've got two main functionalities for it. One is just the toolkit, and then one is the object relational mapper. So you've got the toolkit, which pretty much just makes all of your queries really, really easy, and just working with tables and databases in general. And then the object relational mapper, which makes it really easy to use Python objects with whatever database you're using.
So can you talk about the ORM a little more? Because it's not exactly like what people think of when you talk about object relational managers, right? It's like on Ruby on Rails, what's it called? Active table, where you construct like an object, say a person who has these attributes, and those are mapped directly to the columns.
Right.
But SQL Alchemy doesn't quite do that as nicely, right?
Right. Well, it's different. I don't really know much on Ruby on Rails, but what I've heard, which isn't a whole lot, it seems similar, but I think that the SQL Alchemy actually does it better from what I've heard.
Okay.
Okay. Because, yeah, the really nice thing about this is, like I said, the joys, or the things that I think are a lot of the joys about SQL Alchemy, is that if you don't want to write your queries by hand, you don't have to. Like, at all. Which I find very, very nice, because I don't like SQL that much. At least not going through and doing it. And it also, like you'll see later on, the formatted of it is really, really easy. Okay? And also, if you're doing anything, like I know a lot of Sage is all open source, so you don't really care that much about security because
Huh?
at least, well, in certain ways, but it quotes everything for you, which means that you pretty much, if you use it, you will never have to worry about SQL injection, because it just takes everything that you give it and quotes it for you. So any special characters in there, regardless of what they are, they won't go through to an actual query.
Oh.
Do all of you know what SQL injection is? Yeah? Okay.
No, I don't know what you're thinking.
you mean like that XCD? The
Really tables?
yeah.
Yeah, I know,
Where
okay.
you name your child some ridiculously complicated
Slash
name.
drop, you know. Okay.
Yeah, and something else is that you can actually, like if you have two different databases you're working with, whether one's like a backup for the other, or if you're using two different types and you're saving some information in one and some information in another, everything that you do, you can do it either to both of them at the same time, pretty much, or like do everything with one and then everything with another. So it's set up that like you can work with it really, really easy. And like I said earlier, when you're mapping your Python objects, you can do it straight to a table, but you can also do it to a join of different tables, which is really, really nice. Because like I went and looked at a couple of other things, and this was the only one that I had that had at least an easy syntax for it.
What do you mean by other things? Like other object relational mappers or
Yeah, like, and
like competitors to SQL Alchemy?
right, like I looked at, I don't remember the name of it, but the one that you said
Storm?
you looked to, yeah.
Yeah.
So they didn't have one, at least not that I saw, but it didn't look all that long either. But like I know Sage uses SQLite, at least from the stuff that I saw, so it works with that. It also works with like Postgres and some of the more robust or large,
Enterprise level
yeah,
databases.
databases if any of you are planning on doing anything with any of those. And one thing that's really, really nice is that the way that SQL Alchemy does all of its queries to the database is that it actually has an object that stores all of the different queries that you're sending to the database in a queue and then sends all of them at once, which is good because it's efficient and it is just really nice. It can also go through like the object that you have that's doing it is smart enough to know like if you have two different queries and one has to go before the other, it's smart enough to know to do the first one first. Okay. And something else that's really nice is you have a lot of active developers working on it, both on SQL Alchemy itself and on user extensions, including one that's called Migrate, which is really nice if you have a lot of data already in a database and you want to put it somewhere else, whether, well, assuming that you're going to be using SQL Alchemy for all of that, that it's just another add-on that you can put on there. And there's a couple of other ones on there that seem pretty nice. And, sorry, like I said earlier, it's pretty scalable on what you want to do. Like if you want to just use it as a connection pool, that's fine. It has everything set up so that you can just use it to manage your connections to the database. Even if you want it just to do that and then want to write all of your SQL queries yourself, you can do that. But at the same time, you can also like have a bunch of objects and have pretty much a graph of whatever objects you have and whatever relationships you have between them, and SQL will take care of that also. Okay. And it's very, very easy, at least from what I've seen, all the syntax and such. And one of my favorite things was actually the data types, because you have the built-in ones that are just general for SQL, but really,
Those are
really
pretty
nice one.
loose, right? I mean, aren't SQL data types kind of mucky? That's my impression, that you can kind of say anything is anything. It doesn't complain or.
It's not really, well, from what I've seen, that isn't true. But then I've also been using just the database that they have in the CS department when I was doing everything. But do you guys all know what blobs are? I'm assuming it's just a big collection of data. They have something that's called a pickle type that I don't know if any of you have ever heard of. If you haven't, you will probably get really excited about it like I did. This allows you to put any object, any Python object that is pickleable into your database as just a binary. Like it'll take care of pickling and unpickling it, however, like
But-
when you put it in and take it out,
But in essence, it's just a blob, right?
pretty much.
Okay.
But so the database backend stores it
Yeah.
as a blob.
It's just like a nice wrapper around making a Python object of one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with a couple of Python like SQL things, and it always seems kind of like, okay, you know, there's this thing and you call it with parentheses and you type in a bunch of SQL. And that's not a Python wrapper. It's just like it's just like plugging it in.
Yeah, not particularly. No, this, like, it actually, like, whenever you insert it, it will just do it itself, and whenever you take it out, it'll be what you want it to be. Which is pretty much how I've noticed SQL Alchemy is pretty much whatever you want it to do, that seems to be what it does in general. And you can create your own user-defined types. You can either base them off of one of the other ones, so if you want it to be based off of the Unicode, then you can just extend that and add whatever decorations you want onto that, or you can go based off of an empty class type and just define it however you want.
Does it use Unicode by default for everything? Do you know?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I know that one of, like they have a bunch of really, really long tutorials on there, and one of the ones that they had when they were I said in an existing one, they subclass Unicode, so I would assume not, but I'm not sure what they use. So, and I'm going through some of the Sage code, and it's pretty messy in certain places, which is where the row objects are really, really, really nice, because you can do pretty much anything with them. You can treat them as a tuple and just get out the entries in whatever order they were declared in. Or you can treat it as a dictionary, either with the object from the column or with the name of the object. It can be treated as an attribute, and your row is iterable, so you can just use a simple for loop to go over it if you want to. So, which I thought was really, really nice. So, and also when you're going through the database, whenever you do a query on it, you can ask either for all of the results from the query or just the first one, which is also nice because then you can get it pretty much however you want it.
Oh, and another really nice thing I noticed about SQL Alchemy, because of this object-oriented approach, is that you can actually lazy load columns in your database.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a row that has a blob entry, and when you look it up, you don't actually want to load it, you can not load it until you actually need to access that column.
Yeah, there's
So-
actually more than one. I think there's 4 different ones. There's the lazy, and then there's so you can do it, because there's some like databases where like if you have an object and you delete it in your session, whatever you're in, the default is that it'll automatically load all of the like any objects or any like tuples in any other relationships that have a reference to that row. It'll bring all of those into the session by default. So if you have really large amounts of data, you can specify when to load it, when not to load it, or how many to load.
Right.
So, but by default, it just does everything. And that looks funny now.
Could you try reverse video? Like, do you know how to switch your video to reverse? Make it easier to see. Yeah.
Okay. Not sure why the color's all funny, but that's okay.
It looks good.
Alright, so pretty much the preliminaries, you always want to create a database engine, and then anytime that you're going to be, yeah.
That's nice. It just abstracts away all the, whether it's SQLite or whatever else is.
Yeah,
nice.
no, in
Nice.
pretty much, unless you specifically want to write SQL code, you don't have to do any of it anywhere, which is really nice. You make a lot of objects, and you make objects that depend on objects and stuff like that, but that's about it, which makes me very happy. And so all you have to do is create an engine, and the metadata, anytime that you're going to be creating tables, you're going to need that, just because that's what's going to store all of your information before you send it to the database. And the session you're going to need anytime that you're changing anything. So anytime you're inserting into tables, anytime you're creating an object that will affect your tables, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And so in a lot of places you will either want to create a new table or to load one that's already existing in your database. The first line is the closest you will see to SQL code anywhere in SQL Alchemy, or at least from what I've seen, which it looks a lot like a create table statement. And as you can see, like the strings, it takes length parameters just so we can pass it to the varchars and whatnot. And then if you're just loading one that's already in there, all you have to do is give it the name and metadata and have auto load equals true, and then it'll just load it from your database. Okay. And notice that you are passing in the metadata to both of them. And this is where, like I said earlier, that you can work with more than one table at a time, or more than one database at a time, is because the metadata there is actually bound to the database. And if we go back up, you can see I said metadata.bind and set it equal to the database. I don't actually have to do that. If I want to just have one metadata and then choose whichever database that I'm using while I'm going through, I can do that and just pass the database in as another parameter.
So like if you had another database like called DB2, if you want to work it with that, you just say metadata.bind equals DB2 and then do your SQL.
Yeah, you can do it that way.
Okay, and the metadata isn't like a singleton object or anything, right? Like you could have multiple metadatas.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can have pretty much as many as you want, and you can bind it as many times as you want also. So if you want to just have one and then bind it and do your query and then rebind it and then do the same query on the other database, you can. Okay. Or if you wanted to have two different metadatas and each of them bound to a separate database, it's whichever way you want to do it. Okay. And then once you actually get them, even if you define them, you have to actually call create on them. You can either call it on like one of the tables that you defined, so email table, you could call create on that, or you can create them all at once. And the nice thing about creating them all at once is it'll actually go and check whether or not the table already exists in the database before calling the create table on it. So it'll avoid problems from that, which the other ones won't. Okay. And so if you're going to be inserting, like I said earlier, if you want to do SQL, there is a way around it. It's called a text. So if you wanted to call it on your session, you could have inserted like that string of SQL into it, or the easy way to do it is just create some sort of a query object and then use it. Okay, so we're making the query object as the insert equals users.insert there, and then you can call it either with the values themselves, or you can call it with multiple sets in dictionaries. Okay. And in the like in the users.insert, if I'd only wanted to insert it into certain values, I could have had values equal and then have a dictionary of whatever values I want. Okay, so that's nice. And so let's say that we have, and assuming, remember we created these two tables, and you can assume that there's a reference from the email table, so you can assume that it has like an ID for the email address, and then a user ID. The reference is your user. Okay. So say that we have these two classes. How would you do, like, what kind of upkeep would you have to do in order to keep, let's say, like a list of the emails in the user also? Okay, they're two separate tables, so you've got a one-to-many relationship between them. Okay. So there's quite a bit of upkeep that you would probably have to be doing. Anytime that you're looking for the email, you'd have to figure out either by a query onto the table for that particular user, or by doing a join and then querying it, however you want. SQL Alchemy makes keeping track of it really, really easy. Okay, so if we're going to map, let's say we want to map our email onto the email table. Okay, the top one, all you do is you call mapper and give it the object and then the table. Okay, but in the second one, if we want to make a reference there, all you do is you give it the object, you give it the table, and you say properties equals, and then I'm giving it whatever name I want the attribute to have, and then the relation emails. Okay, the second part of it, the backgraph equals user, means that it's also going to go and put a backwards reference into email, so the email will also have an attribute user. Okay, if I hadn't put the backref in there, then there would just be the link from the user object into the emails, and it actually stores it as a list. So it'll go through and take care of all of that for you. And say we want to make a new object. So all we'd have to do is say, okay, first we're going to make a session from the session object that we had earlier. And then we're going to just create some user. Okay? After we create the user, it's still not in the database. Okay, because you can work with more than one database, so it doesn't know where it should be. So you actually have to say session.save. And then pass it in whatever you want to save. Okay?
What happens if you do session.save Bob again? Does it just, nothing happens? Because it's the same exact object?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Yeah, nothing happens. And it's actually right after you do session.save, it's not actually in the database yet.
Hmm.
Because it's still in your queue. So it hasn't actually been put in there yet. But if we go down and then we search for it, and this is how you can do a query on it, really easy. So it's session.query, and then you give it whatever you're looking for, and then filter by, and then you select whatever you want, and then, or whatever attribute you want and what it's equal to. And then the dot first just means I only want to get the first instance of that. Okay, and then once you actually run that, it'll actually take Bob, insert it into the database, and then run the query. So it's smart enough, like it doesn't actually go and do everything when you say to do it. It does it whenever you need it, which is really nice. And right now, but earlier when I defined the session object, I said bind equal to the database, and then I said auto flush equals true. If you don't set auto flush equals true, it defaults to false, and then you have to actually flush it whenever you want it to save. So if you want to have power over when it stores things to the database, you can do that also. Okay. And the queries, it has all the SQL functions. The one thing about them is that because and or and stuff are already overloaded, all you have to do is have and that, and then whatever your first thing is, and whatever your second thing is. So they just made functions for it. Okay, and it works the same way for all of them. And the queries that it does, it will actually figure things out for you for the most part. So if you say, yeah, so like if we want to join users and addresses, it knows enough to go through and actually look up the references in your database and create it itself. And anytime that you're saving something, so like if we'd had, like we have the Bob object, if we set Bob dot email of 0 equals right here, right? It'll actually go through and change that in the email table, even though you're calling it on the user object, which is really nice. So, yeah. So, do you guys have any questions on things at all?
So you looked at SQL Alchemy for potentially using it with the notebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are like some of the problems that the notebook has right now that SQL Alchemy would totally annihilate?
The one thing that I thought would make it really, really nice is that like there's a lot of data that's being stored more than once. as far as like the actual worksheet objects. And so because you're already using pickling on all of that, it would be really easy to just take those objects and put each of them into a database, and then like have a relation from them to whoever your users are. So that's, like when I was actually going through this, that's why I got really excited about having the pickling object, is because it would make that really, really easy.
Is there any way though to actually map a worksheet to a table? I mean, it's easy to put it into a blob and then just fetch it, but it doesn't really solve.
Worksheets are pretty
Right,
simple. I mean, it's just a list of input cells and output cells.
Right, so the worksheet itself you can still keep as a blob, is what I'm saying. So
Okay.
you don't have to actually change anything on that if you don't want to. Like if you want to store that still all as one thing, you can, or if you want to break it up into pieces, you could do it that way and just
I bet it'll be
make it equal.
I bet it'll be faster to store it as a blob, because I mean if you break it up every time, then there's extra overhead with reconstituting it.
Right.
Okay, maybe I don't understand like what the worksheet object actually is. I thought it stored like all the user information with it as well.
It has
Or is that
mm,
is that separate?
it's just a pointer to the user.
Yeah.
It's separate. The worksheet class, which is in worksheet.py, is all it is I think it has a pointer to the. It may or may not have a pointer to the notebook that it's in, but that's irrelevant.
Okay.
It just has a list of input cells and output cells, and of course, actually, it's a list of cells.
Okay.
So it's just it's literally just a list of cell objects, and cell objects are their input and their output and their ID number. And the worksheet also has a list of users. There's a relation, like a worksheet has a list of, users that own that or that can look at that
access to
worksheet.
it.
Yeah, that have
Okay.
access to it.
Right.
And that's what you will be
That's it.
mapping with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the thing is that a lot of the stuff having to do with the notebook is just relationships or the worksheets themselves. So the thing that would make it really, really nice to using Sql Alchemy is that the worksheets, you can still store them the same way that you are already without having to mess with any of that. But then you can take all the relationships like, okay, who owns this, who has access to it, and stuff like that, and store those as just tables in the
Right.
database itself with like ID to ID references. So, and because of that, because you won't have to store everything all at once, you can just go through and store whatever worksheet is being worked on at that time. You won't have the overhead of going through and saving the entire object, which is what's taking so long right now.
Yeah, so that's what it is. The worksheets inside of the notebook object are the vast majority of this space.
So far what I've found, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what the other person found.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like the ndata.sobj is almost entirely the plain text of worksheets.
Yeah.
Hundreds of megabytes of just the input and output people typed and got. Yeah.
So yeah, and like I said, this would make it really, and it would actually makes, other than going through and making sure that the scheme is really nice and having everything set up so that it can grow with however the notebook's going to grow, which I was actually going to talk to Liam about and see if like what all features there are going to be added at any point in the near future, so we can try to get that set up so that it would be really easy to grow with. Apart from that, using this will actually make my project a lot easier than I originally thought it was going to be.
Just a word of caution, since the notebook uses Twisted,
This actually works really well with Twisted. I don't know if I mentioned that.
so this is all synchronous.
It doesn't have to be.
There's, I think there's a wrapper, right? Like Twisted.enterprise.ad API. You should definitely use that, because otherwise if the notebook ever gets big and you do a SQL Alchemy call, it'll just block until that finishes.
Right.
So
The
you
thing
wanna-
is that it's actually already, like there's already people working on integrating it with Twist. Like there's already asynchronous stuff that you can do. They aren't done with it yet, but it's already headed there.
And that's part of SQL Alchemy?
And that's part of SQL Alchemy
Oh,
itself.
cool, I didn't know about that. But yeah, that's just definitely something to watch out for. Is
Yeah.
the interplay between asynchronous and something's good.
Yeah. No, I actually forgot to mention that. But yeah, they actually, it's already up there that it's starting to work with Twist. I don't know if it's all the way there yet because I haven't looked
Right,
in it as much, but it's already
Awesome.
Asynchronous. Like it's by default it isn't, but you can use it that way. I guess
So,
would be a better
I
way to
mean,
put it.
So how this would play out in practice might be that you tell the database to write everything to disk, but it doesn't lock while it's doing that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
can make
it just has a
asynchronous.
callback that says,
Yeah.
oh, I'm done.
That's much better.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Although SQLite is so fast that usually, unless you're doing something really, really big,
Yeah.
you won't notice.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also because there's so much information like out there, because a little easier, it should actually be pretty easy to, because I know you'd said something about like keeping track of the users and logins and stuff like that. It
Yeah.
should be relatively easy to do that at the same time.
Yep.
How many people are using the public, like how many accounts do we have on the like, public? list?
2,700.
Wow.
Is that all three of them?
No, that's just the
That's just the public one?
sagenv.org has that many
Okay.
accounts. I mean, I don't know what the frequency of usage is,
No,
but,
yeah.
but we do have we've written little scripts that give stats about that. I don't remember what the latest is.
Okay.
It gets heavily used despite sucking so much from not scaling. I mean, the problem is just every couple of minutes it writes a 270 megabyte file to disk. That takes a long time
Mhm.
to pickle. It's basically like writing to database where the database is a single pickled file, locking everything for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That affects performance. I'm sure there's a lot of other things out there, but that's the number one thing that's killing performance right now,
Yeah.
which could be dealt with, I think.
And something else that's really nice is that anytime like that you're doing queries, like that one's relatively easy, but like the select ones also, like it'll actually go through and compute your from clause for you. You don't even have to specify what tables to use.
Mhm.
You just have to say what you want out of it. And then like whatever relation. So like if you had like you want to get all the information from the user table with like the email being a@a.a, all you'd have to do would be select user and then email to a also. So like it's really, really easy. You don't even have to say, like even though this is in a different table, because you have the form key relationship there, it'll go through and do it itself. So.
Cool.
Anything else?
What about the documentation and stuff?
The documentation's actually pretty good.
It's on their website that they plan to release a book.
Mm-hmm.
And is
Yeah,
it
it's
like something?
sometime this year.
Okay, but you can't get it yet, or is there like a pre-version up, or? did you-
I didn't see one, but there could be.
Uh-huh.
Like I didn't see one from the site that I was on. I don't know if it's somewhere else though.
Uh-huh. So you got to look for a few minutes at Storm and other options, and
I looked a little bit at Storm, and I looked a little bit at, shoot, I don't remember the name of it. It was a Java one though, just to see what it was like for
mhm,
other languages, especially since I'm a lot more used to Java still.
mhm. Any comments about the relation between those and SQL Alchemy, in your opinion?
I really like SQL Alchemy,
Mhm.
honestly. From what I've seen, especially since like they tend to follow the Python way of like don't guess at anything.
Mhm.
So like if you could guess or not guess, don't guess. So they make everything be explicit, like the way that you had to go through and actually bind the database to whatever you were doing, which makes a little more work, but once you actually get to like going through and doing all of your queries and working with your objects and stuff like that, it's way easier
Mhm.
from what I've seen.
Yeah, when I looked at the options between SQL Alchemy and Storm and some of the other ones, SQL Alchemy seems to provide like more basic functionality that
Mhm.
people can write extensions on top of.
Mhm.
So for example, to get kind of like the Storm ORM model, there's an extension called Elixir,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it really easy to do this sort of object to table mapping. But it's
Right.
it's built on top of SQL Alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely more flexible than a lot of the other ones. And it's more general purpose. Like the work on Storm is sponsored by Canonical, which is also coming to Ubuntu, and they have, you know, very specific reason they want to develop Storm, where SQL Alchemy seems to be used by more people and it's more general.
Right. Yeah, and the thing that's really nice about it, like I said earlier, you can use it for various functions, like, and there are people that use just as like a connection tool because it keeps track of things really well with the way that it handles stuff. And it'll also, like, it won't change your queries if you have like a really fast, like you go through and optimize your query as much as you possibly can. SQL will let you do that, and like you don't have to worry about like them fiddling with anything in the back end. So pretty much they let you be in as much control as you want to, but at the same time provide a really, really easy interface that'll pretty much take care of it for you.
Cool. Excellent. Okay, so the next seminar is going to be a week from now by Josh Cantor. It's going to be part 1 of 2 talks on how to use